Um, yeah, I got one of my favorite guests back, Brian Comerford, and but this time it's just Brian and I. We've decided to shed Nick and Roxanne and just
That's
have a
right.
conversation one on one because I don't know if you feel this way, Brian, but it seems like when the four of us together, Nick and Roxanne just monopolize the conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm always worried about that with them.
Yeah, I hope they both listen to this episode. I'm going to get an earful when we're done.
Well, I just hope that you and I can allow one another to talk.
It will be a challenge. And I've been working on my interrupting skills by interrupting more. No, I'm just kidding. So we were sitting here thinking about what do we want to talk about today? And Brian said, how about the Great Resignation?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and tell us. I've never heard. I haven't heard that term yet, so that's new to me. So can you put some context around the Great Resignation?
Yes, this is something that I keep seeing coming up in business publications and coming up in uh, circles for some of these advisory groups that I'm part of. It's a real thing. I think there's a couple of different factors. The pandemic sort of turned on a lot of folks to the idea of remote work who had not ever really been a part of that before. Some of the people that got turned on to it were organizational leaders who suddenly realized, hey, actually, we get some pretty good productivity out of folks if they're not in the office. But for a lot of folks who have been called back into their office setting, they're making a move to do something different and go elsewhere. And sometimes that includes starting your own business, right?
Mhm.
And for some folks, they've just kind of resigned themselves to to maybe it's a good time to just kind of ride things out and not even have a job until everything kind of settles with whatever's happening with the global pandemic. So
Wow, that just scares me to death. I don't think I've been the new word that I learned. I was when I was at Victoria's Secret. I got offboarded. It's just a
oh
nicer way of saying fired or laid off or
yeah.
whatever. But rare. That was the only small period of time that I was ever without a job, and it just didn't feel right. I can't imagine going. You're my boss. Going, I don't have a job. I don't want this job. I'm gonna go find another job.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if you were bringing together the phrases Victoria's Secret and offboarding into the same sentence, it might conjure a different image for me than what you just described. So that one does have an unhappier ending than what I had envisioned, by the way.
Yes, actually, yes. And they're a company here based out. We're based out of Columbus, Ohio, and sometime I'll tell you this some of the story about how that all just dissolved for the most part. But back to the Great Resignation.
Yeah, so I think part of the first sort of intimations that I heard around this were related to folks who were suddenly, quote unquote, making more money by just taking their unemployment benefits and whatever the added stimulus was on top of that, because in sum total they were suddenly making more money by not going back to work than they were actually being part of the workforce. So
Right.
disincentivized them from actually finding new employment after having been offboarded. Uh, but I also question how much of that is true. I mean, I guess if it's in your own economic interests to just keep cashing the checks that are coming in, and you're doing better than you were, and you're getting ahead faster than you were by actually being employed, then that makes perfect sense. But ultimately, I also have a belief that people like to be engaged in something that makes them feel like they're contributing to something meaningful. So I think there's probably as much of that dimension to the choices folks are making right now, because they've had a little bit of time to reflect and they realize, yeah, I don't feel like I was contributing to something very meaningful in what I was doing before. I'm just
Right.
going to take this time to figure out what that could be.
Mhm. Okay. So, but what about the white collar corporate tower individuals who, I can still remember hearing you're not going to be productive if you're working from home. The perception is that you're home eating bonbons and watching Oprah or Ellen or whomever. And then all of a sudden we were shoved into that, okay, everybody's got to go home and work from there.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah, to your point, oh my God, we are productive. And this is working. It took a while,
Mhm.
but now, we're telling people to come back to work and they're going, no.
I like to eat bonbons in between Zoom meetings.
I like Zoom fatigue. I'm okay with this.
Yes, and that ties into a different theme, which is the great weight gain that's come along for many of us in combination with Zoom fatigue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember the freshman 10, but I put on the COVID-19 because that's what 19 stands for, the minimum amount of weight you're going to gain
That's
during this
right.
pandemic. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. If 19 were where it stopped,
That's why I said the minimum amount.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Peter, because you know, before the pandemic, Nick and I obviously co-produce a podcast on leadership and technology, and remote workforce was always this topic that we heard, continually criticized for the reasons that you stated, that, executives tend not to have a belief that you're going to get anything done if you're actually doing that work from your home. But in the tech industry in particular, a lot of the workforce has already been sort of attenuated to the idea that now I get my work done and I get it done on my time, as long as the work's getting delivered, that's success. And as an entrepreneur myself, in years past, home was my office, and part of the challenge that I experienced then is actually what I've experienced as a rerun during the pandemic, which is working from home can leave you in a place where you never know when to turn off, right? And so the
Right.
productivity may just keep going and going. So there has been an upside for certain companies that are now measuring that and realizing, hey, this is a pretty good thing. We're getting some pretty good productivity out of people. But I think Nick has said it many times in other conversations that we've had, that people are going to figure out how to goof off inside the walls of your office building just as easily as they can at home. So if that's their proclivity to do so, then that's a different challenge, right? That's like a management challenge, versus a location challenge.
It's an ego challenge. It's that control factor that I want to have that control over the masses or whatever, and I want them back in here because it's my belief, not the belief of my people, but it's my belief that they're going to be productive here, even though they've shown me, and we've seen the research and everything, that they're probably more productive, working, from home. But it's that a lot of that control factor that goes into it, and not really. I just talked to there's a CPA firm in Boston who I'm doing some work for, and they said that their managing partner, the executive committee, basically surveyed all of the employees. What do you want to do? Work from home, hybrid, come back in. And basically everybody said, we'll do a hybrid model. We'll come back, but maybe for 1 or 2 days and stay 3 days home. Well, you have natural attrition in accounting firms, but it hasn't hyped itself up versus a firm who's bringing people, making them, demanding them that they come back, and people bolting from that point.
Yeah, well, here's the challenge with corporate demands at this point. There's enough companies out there who are willing to have that kind of flexibility for their workforce, that for people who are being told, you're going to have to come back into the office, or you're going to have to be in 4 days and we'll entertain letting you work remote for 1 day, or we're going to change your base salary structure because you're now working from the countryside versus being in a municipality. Folks who hear that kind of message, where there's a demand, right? I think are saying, okay, well, I'm going to take a hike then, because there's a bunch of other companies here who are going to give me the flexibility that I would prefer. So it has shifted, I think, sort of the preferences to the labor force versus the corporate marketplace to dictate that.
Right. But it just ceases to amaze me that senior management are making demands without even surveying their people. It's got to be my generation that's doing it. It's the baby boomer generation
Sure.
and probably some older type of long-standing companies who haven't evolved into today, even though what we were forced to do, we still lack trust
Mm-hmm.
in the people that we hire.
Well, it's true, yeah. And again, I think that's a leadership challenge, right? I mean, that's a reflection of a leadership style that I think really started to disappear at the end of the 90s. And when you think about it, that's right around the same time that you started hearing a lot of sort of this corporate strategy shtick, right? Where employee experience became this new phrase that was introduced, and suddenly there's corporations all over a variety of industries. Oh yeah, we've got an employee experience initiative. That's one of our, strategic objectives. Well, that's great and everything. And you kind of think about where much of that came from. It was sort of companies like Apple and Microsoft that started that trend, right? It's not just jeans on Friday, it's jeans every day. It's dress for your day. We trust that you have a level of awareness as a professional that if we've got clients coming in the office, maybe you're going to suit up a little differently than if you're just spending the day working on an RFP response or something, right?
Right. Yeah. And just thinking about, I don't know, it's just that overall lack of trust, which why do you hire people? Why, I'm going to hire you. Am I just hiring a number or just a body to put in place? Or am I hiring somebody that's actually going to fit in this job, fit in this role, do what we need to do? And until they prove me wrong and I can't trust them, I'm going to trust them. And to Nick's, we all goof off. But I mean, there's you get the Great Resignation. I got the great the distractor, Amazon. Bottom line.
I thought you were going to say Netflix, but yeah, Amazon's up there too. For me, it's more like Wikipedia. I find myself going down these trails of things that are fascinating to me.
Oh my God, Wikipedia. or maybe better yet, YouTube.
Yes.
I've lost hours at times throughout the day. Just, hey, what's on YouTube? What can I find? Oh, cool. This is cool. I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch this funny cat video or something stupid.
Right. Well, and that's that's much of that is this era of what we've called Web 2.0, right? This emergence beyond the static, right, where the content's just being served to you and you're consuming it, to more of this preference orientation, right? We're moving through things in the way that we want to. That's where the whole kind of cut the cable movement came from. It's not that you're watching less junk that you're consuming through your screen. It's just that now it's a preference-based consumption of junk, right?
It's that a la carte version of junk.
That's right.
I've got different things I can choose on because of my interest. And if I'm going to take some time to goof off, this is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it still comes back that associate, that employee still knows they have a deadline. They still know they have a project that they have to do. So they might now be staying, instead of cutting out of work at 5, they may have to work till 6. But
Right.
I think there's much more flexibility in that working from home than being in the office. And it depends on the overall corporate culture that maybe if I work for somebody, everybody left at 5.
Mhm.
I mean, cleared out.
Right.
It's like, what the heck? Well, if everybody's doing it, I might as well do it. And
Yeah.
then if you go home, I don't know, we used to take our work home with us. I don't think much of that is happening because we are home.
It's true.
Right?
Well, and honestly, my personal productivity has fallen because, I used to take the commuter train to and from
Mhm,
work. And so that was 30 minutes of quality me time that I got,
mhm.
each direction, a couple times a day. And that disappeared, because I don't have the commute. And so consequently, I have to be deliberate in finding that, just as I have to be deliberate, whether it's my health monitor chiming and telling me it's time to get up and move around, or it's just me looking out the window and realizing, hey, it's kind of a beautiful day. I'm going to take 15 minutes and walk around the block and get away from a
Yeah,
screen, right?
right.
Those become so part of the new pattern that you have to invoke, I think, to kind of shake up, what otherwise for a lot of us just keeps us tied to the desk.
So out of curiosity, when you were commuting to and from working at 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back, what were you listening to? What were you reading? What were you doing? Or were you just napping?
I guess it depended on the day, but I do a lot of writing, so it was always
Okay.
a good opportunity for me to write. But it was also a good opportunity for me to read, and then occasionally, I would get hooked on a podcast like this show, and it would be the kind of thing where I'd find myself staring out the window, listening to a couple of guys like us jabber on about something that was apparently interesting enough to hold my interest.
Yeah, yeah. I, when I had those opportunities that I was commuting back and forth, especially if it was like 30 minutes or so, I would, well, we didn't have we didn't call them podcasts back then, but it was just like the radio or just reading the newspaper or the Wall Street Journal. Got it
Right.
in your hand, big thing, and just sitting there and just consuming the day's news or the day's business news, where they're going from. But yeah, do you do much of that? I mean, I don't. I'm not inclined to pick up a paper, look at the paper anymore, or even go to a news site. Um, yeah, I've kind of lost that interest. Well, there's a lot of reasons why I probably lost that interest, but
Yes. Probably like most people, I've got RSS feeds set up that have their own algorithms behind them that have determined here are the things that I tend to veer off on, when I'm looking at digital content, right? So it keeps trying to serve me up more of that, as if I mean, perhaps for some people that's what they do. They just get into one groove and they kind of stay there, but I'm more all over the map. But I think the detriment to that, and we've seen a lot of this, especially in the last few years, we now have entirely biased based content that is
mhm,
being served up in this unlimited fashion, and those algorithms are part of what just keeps scooping up another helping, and
mhm.
so I think the variety of perspective has continued to narrow into things that a lot of folks, they'll just ignore everything else because they only want to consume these things that validate whatever their biases are already.
Right. Yeah, and that in itself, um, is, I think, being the big, great divide
Mm.
within the country is, oh, I get all my news out of CNN. Okay, well then you're gonna have, as we used to call it back in the day, the Clinton News Network. And then you've got Fox over here who's on the right. And I'm gonna get all my news from there. And it is very bias based. But do you think that bias-based this feeding of information is also part of why people are going, I'm out of here. I'm done. I just can't work at this place because of X, Y, and Z. Do you think that's part of it as well?
That could be. I mean, we've certainly seen a lot of this urban flight, right? Where people are now no longer feeling like they need to stay in an urban center
Mhm.
for their work. And particularly if their work is of a certain level where they're, maybe they're more consultative, or, their day is made up of producing office product for clients
Mhm.
versus having to physically put your hand on something, for your clients.
Mhm.
And so those folks have, a lot of them, especially in Colorado where I live, we've seen this explosion of, the real estate market up in the mountains, because people are like, well, I used to have a mountain home and I lived in the city, and the mountain home was the place that I'd go to occasionally, but now I, I can get great internet access in the mountains, and so I'll sell the place in the city and I'll live in the mountains, or I'll turn the place in the city into a rental or whatever. And
Right.
and now it's like, why not have a lifestyle that's based more around these things that I would prefer to be spending most of my time doing, versus feeling like, I'm rowing on the slave ship.
My niece is works in corporate office for Macy's, and she lived in Queens in Astoria
Hmm.
for I don't know, she had an apartment like 8 9 years, rent controlled, whatever.
Oh, sure.
And when this all came down, she was working from home. She was, this is a New York City apartment. I can touch all four walls at the same time without moving 2 inches. So she ended up moving um, back home and moved back in with her mother. And I mean, it's been over a year, and they've survived each other. But she goes, why? I love. She goes, I love New York. Don't get me wrong, but why am I going to pay those dollars when I can go, well, rent free, but go someplace that it's not everybody's on top of everybody, be able to kind of spread out. Yeah, that's part of this great resignation
Yeah, no
is where
question.
we're going to live. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And why would I continue? I think we were touching on this at the beginning. We've seen this lull in people returning to work who have been unemployed, or,
Mhm.
have been furloughed or whatever it is. And again, I think it has as much to do with the time people have been allotted to be able to reflect on what is the purpose of what they're delivering through their work. Because I truly do believe people are, purpose oriented. I mean, yeah, we all need some form of income, right, to get all the
Mhm.
bills paid. But if suddenly you've got an opportunity to take that time and to reflect, we've also seen a lot of these very creative businesses that have propped up. And more, I think there's an orientation for folks to think, maybe this was a blessing, because, being a server in a restaurant, it's lucrative, and, it gave me flexibility in my schedule and everything, but it's still just a job, right?
Mhm.
A just over broke. So maybe I can, maybe, maybe I can move on to something that's more rewarding, and take a little bit of time, and, take some classes or get a certification, and then I can go work for a company where I do have some kind of remote work opportunity that's afforded to me. I think that's true as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And thinking about that. So also I find it funny, haha, that okay, we're going to furlough half of our employees. We're not offboarding them, we're furloughing them. Just
Mhm.
let them. But then when things turn around, we want them to come back.
For the
I
same wage, by the way.
Yeah, for the same wage at the same company that just laid me off, and I had to collect unemployment or whatever. But then they turn around and say, we want you back. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I'm not thinking that's up against leadership as well, because that's nobody saw the pandemic coming. We all agree about that. But there are still some companies that still are able to keep their employees because they went through the PPP loans. They didn't have to lay off
Sure.
people.
Yeah.
And I think part of that could be the short sightedness of our economy when, with especially if you're a publicly traded company, you're quarterly bound
Right.
versus thinking out, strategically over the next 2 or 3 years. And I, I even said this back in the recession when CPA firms are letting people go. You don't go back. Very rarely do you leave a CPA firm, go to work in industry, and you come back. Rare, like maybe 1%. Don't have any facts or figures on it. But then when the economy comes back, they go back to the people and say, "Hey, you want to come back to us?" And they're going, "Hell no." And they, but that's been the model all along. And it's
Right.
going, well, why would you let them go?
Mhm.
Figure out a way, take less so you keep your people. Because if they walk out the door, they're not likely to come back.
Right. Well, it's interesting too that part of what you described, Peter, I think is, the United States, in my opinion, has been a victim of a lot of very capitalist oriented decision making,
Mhm.
approaches, even though we're actually a socialist capitalist economy. And if you don't believe that, then just you don't have to rewind very far to remember the too big to fail era of banking bailouts.
Right,
If
right.
we were truly a free market economy, we would have seen massive disruption in our economy as a
Mhm.
result of what happened with the mortgage meltdown.
Right.
But part of the reason that I bring that up is, I'm married to someone who's from another country. And, so a lot of the information that I receive isn't just US biased based, right? And I've also traveled all over the world and I've seen how other countries operate. And there isn't a developed nation that isn't a mixed socialist capitalist economy. And there's varying degrees to how that functions. But I think it's also interesting as you look around the world to countries that aren't so hung up on this idea of being number one, right, and declaring it openly and often. But and yet you look in economic rankings and you see that they're actually positioned in the top 10 economies in the world. And it's like, well, hang on a second, but they've got all these other things that I've heard would bankrupt this country if we were to make those contributions to society. And so I think I think we're starting to see sort of a forced rethinking of some of this, simply because, as I mentioned before, there is strength in numbers with a labor force right now that in many ways is helping to reinvent the way that companies offer compensation and life balance benefit to its employees.
Yes, it is. It's interesting to watch this whole thing play out, and I tend to think this is just really starting right now on how this
Mhm.
thing is ultimately going to play out. And we're going to see this through 2022, maybe by the end of 2022, when hopefully we are COVID's in the rearview mirror, but we've learned how to live with it and accept it, and whatever that may look like. Um, and I mean, just think about the corporate footprint within these large, that one accounting firm in Boston, because of what their people said prior to the pandemic, they were getting ready to lease out and build out their space. Well, they had to go back to the architects and make it smaller. You see that corporate footprint in these large urban areas starting to
Yeah.
shrink.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is that doing to the commercial real estate market? I mean,
Oh
the
yeah.
ripple effect of this uh, uh, pandemic is the ripples just keep coming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And at the same time that we've seen the disruption to the commercial real estate market, we've seen an increase in all of this other real estate investing. And part of that is attributed, to the fact that the Fed has kept interest rates as low as they have for as long as they have.
Right.
And it took some folks a little longer to catch up with the idea of that, but they start to realize, well, wait a second, this is actually a good time for me to leverage using someone else's money, a
Right.
mortgage company,
Right.
and rather than getting this trickle down effect of what the interest rate is providing to me with the stack of cash I keep in the bank. I'll put it over here in something that's actually got a higher appreciative yield. And, the amount of interest that I have to pay out against the loan is actually insubstantial compared to what I'm getting as a result economically, right,
Right.
from
Right.
what I'm receiving.
Yeah. So is the housing market in Denver similar to what is around here in Columbus, where you put your house up for sale, let's say $300,000, and people you have a showing, and by Monday morning, people have made offers of $400,000 on your house.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know a market right now where it's not happening to a degree to that effect.
But think about that. So I I decided I'm gonna just put my house up for sale because I'm gonna reap the benefits here.
Mm.
Okay, so I just sold my house. I made $100,000 more than I thought I was gonna make. Oh crap! Now I gotta go find a house.
Yeah. I can see now that you're living in a broadcasting closet.
That's exactly that's exactly because I couldn't find anything because everything was I was getting outbid the whole time. So
Right.
if I had to find a place to live, the apartments market, that rental market has also exploded.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you knew this about me, but real estate investing is one of my side passions. And it's, as an investor, what it's done is it's actually forced me to go a little outside of my comfort zone, looking at much larger properties. And so consequently, instead of looking at the types of properties that I would typically invest in,
Mhm.
now I've been looking at things that are, like 12 unit
Oh,
buildings, or I've been looking at empty parcels of land and have been talking with, potential partners to do development, because all of a sudden the inventory doesn't exist,
right.
but there's still such high demand. And I think part of the shift that we're also seeing with some of the commercial real estate here is a lot of it's getting rezoned and repurposed to then accommodate for the demand in the residential housing. So, I think we're going to see quite a bit of that, transition here in the next 12 to 18 months.
So were your real estate investments are primarily single family homes?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. My buddy in Lexington been doing has somewhere between 15 and 20 homes.
Mhm.
And he just retired, and that was going to kind of be his retirement. You know, hell no, I'm going to cash out my equity. And
Right.
he's depleted his inventory from 20, I think maybe down to 10, with the goal of he might just keep 5 just to have something to do to get out of the house.
That's a good goal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's done in some aspects because we just had a conversation and he didn't mention that. Well, I could go after some bigger properties.
Hmm.
I think he's really just wants to check out, live in Lexington, Kentucky, drink bourbon on his porch, and enjoy life as it comes. He's got a couple grandkids.
That
Yeah.
sounds pretty good too, but I probably would have kept those other handful of properties to make sure that my passive income was at a certain level, you know,
Yeah.
I could continue
Yeah.
to live that way worry free.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, do you think we've cured anything during this conversation?
Well, we've cured, I think, our own reckless desire to go entertain ourselves.
Yes, we have done that. Uh, uh,
I think there's been some gratuitous creation of content that we're trying to throw in front of other folks to help with their great distraction.
Absolutely. You said that so profoundly. Uh, but I think that this conversation could go on for a while, and we'll come back and revisit it. Maybe we'll let Nick and Roxanne join us next time.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah,
They're,
yeah.
they're
Why
good for
not?
some laughs.
Very, very much so. Good for some laughs. Uh, but I thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule because you do have a full-time W-2 job to go
It's
along with
true.
your multiple part-time 1099 jobs or
That's right.
K1
That's right.
jobs, whatever
Yeah.
they be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and you have a family, and you have one child too.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. We got
One
one little guy who
one little
just
guy.
crossed the threshold into the teen years.
Oh no, you know what's happening now? You were so cool in the single years. Now you're, oh my God, you're
That's
gonna be
right.
so stupid. You're gonna be so very
Yes.
stupid.
Yeah. I'm already
Yeah.
there.
Oh
I'm already-
God, my son. Yeah. He's 21. I don't know how he made it there, Brian. I really don't. I thought I was gonna, yeah. And but he's starting now to cusp into those early 20s where he's kind of going, Dad might have been right on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
He's just on the cusp of that. I
Uh-huh.
can't wait.
Right.
The
Right.
last 11 years have been hell.
Well, it's with all things come change, right? Impermanence is it's just something that we all have to learn to live with. And for those of us that continue to age, we have to try to age as gracefully as
As
possible.
we, yeah, I told you I turned 60. I'm coming up on 61 in December, and I take the 60s are like the new 30s. I mean, but it's just some things you can't do that like touch your toes that you may be able to do in your 40s or 50s. It's
Right.
if somebody told me the 60s were going to be like this, I would have believed them. But man, I do love this next 10 years coming up. Now the 70s I'll reserve my judgment until I get a bit closer there.
Well, it's never too late to start with some yoga. And that way, by the time you get to your 70s, you might be appreciative that you spent your 60s doing a little yoga routine every day.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad idea because I know somebody who teaches yoga. I said, do you have a class for older guys who are as flexible as a 2x4? You think I'm kidding? And she goes, yes, because we treat everybody the same. And if you can't touch your toes, go as far as you can. And eventually you'll see them at some point if you stick with it. So
Oh,
maybe I
see.
should take up yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something to be said for yoga pants too. But the response that I thought you were going to give was that the yoga instructor said, Peter, for a price, anything is achievable. And when someone's getting up into your age bracket, the same yoga routine costs twice as much. And it's just because I know you've got more disposable income.
Oh, I have to send her. I have to send her a link to this and say, make sure you at least you listen to the last part of it.
Don't give her any ideas.
Yeah. Well, buddy, I'll let you get back to being a W-2 guy for the remainder of the day out in beautiful Denver, Colorado. I thank you again for your time. I greatly appreciate it. It's good seeing you. And the four of us have to get together in DC or somewhere and spend a few days together because I think it'd just be an absolute blast.
I'm with you. I agree with that. Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's always a pleasure, and it's an honor to be your guest. Thanks for having me today.
And he said, honor, now I'll owe him another $20.